Good morning once again.
Morning.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
With respect to the light situation, I'll tell you what I was thinking. I have a wedding this afternoon, and this week, although it didn't impact upon me directly, my office manager was holding her head in dismay because the wedding coordinator said that the bulbs are not precisely the same hue. And we have tall ceilings, and the wedding coordinator was demanding that we get in a scaffold and make sure that all the bulbs were the same hue. So I don't wish that on you. Now, friends, the procedure I'd like to follow is to show you selected scenes from these three films, as time will permit, to pause the action at critical moments and give certain comments. But for the benefit of those who are joining us right now and will remain for the second worship, rather than those who were here for the first worship, we're talking about the phenomenon of retelling. And my thesis is that retelling is a dynamic activity, not a static activity. Retelling by nature does not mean repeating words exactly with nothing added of one's own time period or personality. It is true there are cultural structures where we prize exactly the same words, but in many other areas of life we allow ourselves the liberty of putting something of ourselves into the retelling. And when we have that frame of reference, what we lose is, of course, the absolute continuity with the way it was told last time, but what we gain is the opportunity to correlate the retelling. By the free retelling, we correlate the original story with something important in our lives. And my contention is that the gain may transcend the loss. It all depends on how well it's done. But I would not want to condemn a retelling ab initio for not being exactly the same as the old. And the case I gave in point in the sanctuary was to look at Melville's great novel Moby Dick and the two remakes, the two retellings that I'm familiar with, the movie with Gregory Peck as Captain Ahab and the movie with Patrick Stewart as Captain Ahab. And neither one is identical to each other nor to the original, but each one deserves to be judged and learned from on its own merits. And I'm going to make a similar case with these three retellings of the Moses story. Now, the first one we're going to look at is from 1923. It's a silent film. So if you're not hearing Moses speak or Pharaoh, don't worry. It's not the problem, dear Brutus, lies not in our transponders. Hear the organ music? Can we make that a little louder?
Yeah.
I'm blocking on the name of the organist. He was a very prominent movie composer. And by the way, when silent films were made, there was music on stage because it helped the actors to be in sync. And that music was then given out to piano or organ or small orchestra. So there was a uniformity of the music for a given film, and that's part of the artistic creation. Whenever we see Moses, we're going to hear a particular melody. It's a leitmotif, and I'll explain that.
Do you want the audio turned up?
We could turn it up just a bit,
Yeah.
yes. Theodore Roberts, about 60 years old at the time of this film. He's a much older Moses than Charlton Heston, and I think he's a more authentic Moses in a certain sense. Miriam, Estelle Taylor, the wife of Jack Dempsey, and a real flapper bombshell, as we will see. She's a kind of a Theda Bara character here. The McTavishes I don't think you know the McTavishes from the book of Exodus. The Ten Commandments, this version, has about 45 minutes of the Bible story and then an hour plus of a story set in the 1920s of a family where one son lives by the Ten Commandments and the other one doesn't, and we see what the consequences are. Here, let's look at this.
That's Freud, isn't it?
I think this is the key to the entire retelling right here, which is why I'm stopping it. Our modern world defined, I don't know why it's in the past tense, our modern world defined God as a, quote, religious complex and laughed at the Ten Commandments as old-fashioned. I believe that Reverend Lewis is spot on, that this is Freud, a complex. Freud, despite his father's efforts to get him to be a loyal Jew, Freud was a militant atheist, and he described religion as a universal neurosis. In 1908, Freud wrote a very important essay about ritualistic behavior among neurotics. And then he did not shrink from drawing the conclusion that religion is a universal neurosis. Now, it is true, there are some people who suffer from obsessions, from compulsions. They have to repeat certain actions such as hand washing or counting rituals. They have certain mannerisms that are markers of one or another abnormal condition. Maybe it's Tourette's syndrome, or maybe they suffer from OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. So there is a connection of ritualistic behavior with some psychopathologies. However, I think we would say, and we're not the only ones who would say, that Freud overdid the case, right? In saying that all ritual is a sign of neurosis. In fact, if I could have been there, I would have been a fly on the wall of Freud's water closet, and I would have pointed out to him that he probably shaved in the same way each day. He started here, or he started here, wherever he started the same way each day. He probably brushed his teeth in the same order every day. So, Dr. Sigmund, you yourself have ritualistic behavior. Does that make you neurotic? Okay, so let's see what we have to do. Help! I'll keep talking while my technical wizard helps. So DeMille is correctly criticizing the fashion of the first decade of the 20th century. Okay, Freud's essay is 15 years before this movie. The movie is 1923, the essay was 1908. And DeMille points out that within a few years of the modern fashion, if we can just, the First World War broke out. And since we are right now at the 100th anniversary of the First Battle of the Marne, I think we can understand the horrors of the First World War, total war. It really was the end of a whole era of European history. And unfortunately, although they hoped it was the end of an era of warfare, it was the beginning of a century of ever more life-consuming bloodshed.
You know, I'm struck, Rabbi, about you could almost, some people might almost describe today as blood-drenched, bitter world, no longer laughingly cries for a way out.
Indeed, indeed. Now, I understand DeMille's response to be that of a fully engaged and conservative Christian sensibility. His point is that if you ignore the Ten Commandments, you are ignoring the very foundations of a world civilization. And you are reducing us to a kind of a Hobbesian nightmare of, the war of all against all. Now, I'm quoting Hobbes not only in salute to my colleague, Professor Brenner, who knows more about Hobbes than I will ever know, but to point out that there's a structure of thinking here, that there has to be an absolute authority. And either that absolute authority is God, or it's going to be some human tyrant. That theme becomes ever more clear in the 1956 retelling, where at the beginning of the Ten Commandments, DeMille himself gets out on stage and tells you that the choice is very clear. Either worship the Lord, or you're going to end up with the idolatry of worshiping some human incarnation of amoral power. So for DeMille, Pharaoh is Putin, Pharaoh is every dictator that we can imagine. And of course, God is God. Okay, so now we're going to go on. Remember a few things about movie making in the 1920s. The acting was what we might call overacting, but that was by design. So don't be surprised when the actors strike poses like so. That's what they're supposed to be doing. You'll also notice that the costume detail is well informed. The field of Egyptology had been bringing ever more knowledge of what the physical culture, material culture of ancient Egypt was like. Napoleon invaded Egypt in 1798, sparked a century plus of Western European and American interest in Egypt. So the headdresses are right, the kilts are correct, the breastplates are correct, and later on, DeMille's history researcher, Henry Nordlinger, Nordlinger, wrote a book called Moses and Egypt, where he details all of that. So here we start off with the taskmaster, see that? Which is pretty much how the 1956 film begins as well. Now, I'll talk over this. What was omitted? This isn't faithful to the Bible. This is already not faithful to the Bible, if that's your criterion. The book of Exodus begins with the names of the tribes. And it says, and the children of Israel were exceedingly multiplicative, right? They were fruitful and multiplied, and the Egyptians came to despise them. That's missing. You see, that's missing. We start right with the oppression. My thesis, why is it missing? Because DeMille doesn't want to tell the story of the Hebrews. He wants to tell the story of every man. Everyone who worships power is Pharaoh. Everyone who is the victim of Pharaoh is the Israelites. Every humane religious liberator is Moses. Now here is Miriam, the wife of Jack Dempsey. and she's doing something that she didn't do in the Bible. And that's okay. I keep reassuring you, that's okay. She's bringing water to the slaves, and the overseer confiscates the water. By the way, that is Dathan, the discontented, also not the biblical Dathan. Miriam looks a little bit like Mary Pickford there. Unfortunately, her marriage to Jack Dempsey didn't survive very long. And when you see the scene with the golden calf, I think you'll know why.
Slavery didn't hurt her makeup.
No. By the way, this was done quite some distance from Los Angeles. There's a beach called Guadalupe where they do the dividing of the sea. The studio was very concerned that DeMille had just gone off the reservation. They sent him a telegram and said, "You're crazy, come on back," but he just ignored the telegram. So here we have the command to pay obeisance to Pharaoh. Notice that this is in fake King James English. See that? Here comes Pharaoh. Everyone's whipping the way clear for him. The workers have to kneel down. You get a sense of this man who has been told since birth that he is a god, and he believes it. Now, there is a Dathan in the Bible. He is one of the rebels in Numbers chapter 16. Dathan, Aviram, and Korach rebel against Moses, but we don't have any other mention of Dathan in the scriptures. The rabbis supply that want, and they put Dathan's character all the way, they retroject it back into Exodus. If you remember the story in Exodus chapter 2, where Moses smites the Egyptian who was killing the Hebrew slave, and then the next day he sees two Israelites fighting with each other, and he says to them, "Why are you fighting?" The rabbis say those two Israelites were Dathan and Aviram. So in other words, the rabbis didn't want the Bible to be like a Tolstoy novel. They wanted fewer characters, and each one would be more three-dimensional. That's what the film directors do as well. They're following an old tradition to make each character more three-dimensional. Now you're going to see something very terrible. You're going to see a person crushed. Well, you're not going to actually see it, but someone is going to be crushed to death under the... See that? Now, in the 1956 version of this, the woman caught by her shawl is none other than the mother of Moses, the real Israelite mother. And Moses saves his own mother's life without realizing it's his mother. So DeMille, when he redid this, he decided to make it still more filled with pathos. Now, Pharaoh doesn't care. See that? He goes on. I hope you're enjoying this. It's a very interesting take on how to retell the Bible story. Miriam sees the body of the deceased. She grieves, holds his arm. That much you're allowed to see. Oy vey. You mean she didn't speak Yiddish? Now, this is not Exodus chapter 3, verse 7. It's a careful reworking of it. In Exodus 3:7, God says to Moses, "I have heard the affliction." So notice, now listen to the music. Da da dum, da 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 dum, da 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 dum, da 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 dum. Remember Al Jolson singing that in The Jazz Singer? Al Jolson sings that, and the music is Kol Nidre, the most characteristic Jewish prayer of the Day of Atonement. Every time Moses shows up, here's Moses, you hear Kol Nidre. It's like a Wagnerian leitmotif. Now, this doesn't look like Charlton Heston, does it? How old was Moses according to the Bible at the time of the Exodus? 80 years old. And he lived for another 40 years after that. So this is more the norm. Old, no, well, not old, I mean, but very vigorous. Now, notice here, we have the nasty brat son of Pharaoh. This is not in the Bible at all, the nasty brat son of Pharaoh. This is DeMille's invention, and all the other movie makers follow this particular trope. Why would you want to make the son of Pharaoh a nasty brat? Because when he's killed, you want to soften the thought that God, the God of Israel, has killed an innocent. So you're going to see that this boy basically is asking for it. Moses comes to demand that Pharaoh free the slaves. You have to be pretty buff to be Pharaoh in any of these movies. Yul Brynner did it very well. Now, this does not come from Exodus. This comes from the book of Esther. Haman tells Mordecai to kneel down before him, and Mordecai says, "I only kneel before God." So notice that while DeMille has the reputation of being so authentic to the Bible, and maybe he's authentic to various aspects of the Bible, he's a dramatic artist, and he's filling in and adding to the poignancy wherever possible.
So DeMille does not have the scene with the burning bush?
Well, he's missing a lot of scenes. For example, he didn't have the scene where the midwives refused to kill the Israelite babies. And that would be so filled with pathos. You wonder why he didn't have that scene. But so far, none of the movie makers has picked it up, I think because they read DeMille even more than they read the Bible. And I'm hoping that the next movie, which is coming out this December, will have that. Okay, so we've suddenly cut to the 10th plague. See that? Didn't have time to do all 9 plagues. The later movies do give us the 9 plagues. I'm giving you fair warning, Pharaoh. It's your fault if anyone dies now. You like Pharaoh's wife? When she left right there and went to the Ziegfeld Follies. Oh, look at the kid now. There you go. You've just signed your own death warrant, you little brat. I'll have you watch this up through the death of the son, because I want to show you something. Then we'll skip all the way to the parting of the seas. So Pharaoh doesn't take the warning. Moses, in resignation, says, well, you've done it to yourself. The ladies are laughing at what they think is the discomfiture of Moses, and the kid is whipping him out. What a scene. My son. Okay. Now, you always have an obligatory Bible dance here. Always. It shows some of the sybaritic hedonism of the... every Bible movie has one of these. Remember, this is pre-code, and this was not children's fare, because they would be sitting in the movie theater saying, what did that say? What did that say? And nobody wanted kids at these movies. This was adult entertainment. So there are certain risque, well, for 1920s, risque moments that you wouldn't expect in family entertainment. It gets worse, well, worse, you could say better. It gets more intense than that. Now, notice the lighting. This is well worth pointing out. DeMille is breaking with all the conventions of 1920s silent film making. They wanted the whole scene lit up. They thought you weren't getting your money's worth if you didn't have the whole scene lit up. DeMille said, I want Rembrandt lighting. You know what he means by that? Where light illuminates one subject, everything else is in darkness. And it's very effective. Pharaoh seems to be... now we know why. Look at that. Someone's bringing in his dead son. See, Pharaoh was willing to fight to the last Egyptian, but when it's his own son, then he sees it differently. There are relatively few bits of dialogue, if you think about it, because the ideal in these silent movies was not to need a lot of dialogue. Now, this is, of course, missing in the Bible, although we're so used to it from many reiterations of the Moses movie that it feels perfectly natural. But DeMille is departing from the original in a way that I think is perfectly justified. He's increasing the pathos. Now look what Pharaoh's going to do. Oh, here's Moses with his staff, and you hear the music, Kol Nidre again. You brought this upon yourself, Pharaoh. Is that a cross inside the Star of David? I don't know. Yes. By the way, Star of David is completely anachronistic. There's not even a David, let alone a Star of David, in the time of Moses, right? David is hundreds of years later, and the Star of David is maybe attested from the Middle Ages, not older than that, maybe the 16th century. So now Pharaoh does let them go, now that he's taken a personal hit. Go already. My son. Oh God. Did it have to be thus? Moses is not gloating. That's very important. Now take a look in the background. You see the gods of Egypt? This is a very famous scene. All the later movies copy it. Pharaoh is bringing the dead body of his son to the god of death, the Egyptian god of the underworld, and praying. Although they changed it, it was not a scarab-headed god as in the 1920s. By the 1950s, they had done more research, and it was a bird's-beaked god. You might remember that from the 1956. The scarab was changed. But that doesn't happen, right? The little boy is not Lazarus, right? He's not the child that Elijah or Elisha revived. He's the son of Pharaoh, and he remains dead. Very poignant moment. The scene dissolves, and we have the Exodus. I'm going to try and get us to the dividing of the seas. Do you know how we get back to scene selection? Is there like a main menu? If I touch it, I'm going to break it. In fact, if I think about touching it, I'm going to break it. That's Joshua, by the way, who had no mention at this point in the story in the Bible. But again, you take your characters, you make each one. Here, let's try between 10 and 12. Let's see, let's go back to 7 to 9. 4 to 6.
40 shall touch.
Okay, the parting of the sea. Everyone wants to know, how is this done? Okay, first of all, the chariot scenes were filmed on a dry lake bed, and then they were reused by DeMille in later movies. Because, it's a lot of money to get all those chariots racing. You don't want to waste the investment. The Israelites are camped at the sand dunes of Guadalupe Beach, facing the Pacific Ocean. George Armstrong, no, excuse me. It's not George Armstrong Custer this time. It's Pharaoh Ramesses II. They see the chariots approaching. Hear how the music is increasing the drama. For those of you who are very musically literate, you can tell when the music is increasing the tension. Consternation, they come over the sand dune. Very famous scene. All the later ones do that as well. Come over the sand dune. It's not in the Bible. It's not against the Bible. It's just, again, an added scene. It's part of the enterprise of retelling. I'm spending more time on this one than the later ones because this is not so easy to obtain. The other ones you can very easily find in any video store. This one is worth studying a bit. Moses, Moses, we're all going to die. Don't worry. God has foreseen this. Now, do you know how DeMille divided the waters? Did anyone read that? I'll let you ponder it for a minute as we see what happens. By the way, the special effects, considering that it's 90-year-old technology, you really have to admire that. Now, that's a very bitter cry. That's Dathan, of course. We don't know who said it from Exodus 14, but DeMille makes it Dathan, as he calls him, Dathan the discontented. On a dry lake bed, you can really get up some speed with the horses. Of course, it doesn't make sense that we've already seen them over the dune and now they're back on the seabed, but it's okay. Again, the Star of David is anachronistic. You see different banners. These are the banners of the different tribes of Israel. They're only mentioned in the book of Numbers, but we can use them here. Stand and see the deliverance of the God. Now that's a quote from the Song of the Sea recited after the crossing, but again, slightly misplaced because it fits the purpose of retelling. I have to confess, I really like this Moses. Now watch how we stop them. The pillar of fire, remember that? Pillar of fire now becomes the rear guard for the Israelite camp, and it stops the Egyptians in their tracks. By the way, this is a little bit like Wagner's fire music from The Ring of the Nibelungen. Hear that? I'm sure that's intent. Now, that is real fire. DeMille's production people didn't animate that. They put down a line of something combustible, and that's what the fires are. Even Dathan is impressed. Oh my God. Behold! Okay, now here we get it. I invite you to think how it's done. This is probably the iconic scene of all the Moses movies. I mean, each one does it in their own way. Now we have computers, but this was done without computers. Look, look, the seas are parting. And there we have it. You love it? You gotta love it. That was Joshua. Did you see the woman holding the little goat before? There's always someone holding a goat. They are a pastoral people, right? They hold sheep, they hold goats. In most of the movies, the burning bush scene has Moses holding a little lamb that strayed from the flock. That's not in the Bible. That is a rabbinic sidebar story called a midrash. Here we go. Okay, I invite you to speculate. How is this done? Two waterfalls. Well, that's a good idea. Good idea. Okay. Okay, think of something that would be gelatinous and easily manipulated by a stage crew. Jell-O. This is Jell-O. Isn't that astounding? So he had Jell-O sculpture, and then he sluiced a little bit of water over it. Isn't that wonderful? And he never let the secret out. He was once in court. He wasn't a defendant. I forget why he was in court. And the presiding judge said to him, "Mr. DeMille, before we turn to the business at hand, I want to know, how did you do that?" And DeMille said, "Well, it's a little bit like putting a spoon through hot pudding." That's as close as he would get. Okay, so as you know the story, the Israelites passed through, and then the Jell-O melted. I will tell you a Sunday school joke before we. Why don't we now move to our next one? The boy comes home from Sunday school, and mom says, "What did you learn in Sunday school today, Johnny?" And he says, "Well, we learned that the Israelites were at the shores of the Red Sea and the Egyptians were pursuing them, but God did a great miracle. All of a sudden, a fleet of hydrofoils showed up out of nowhere, and the Israelites boarded the hydrofoils and they made it across the sea to safety." And mom says, "Oh, Johnny, I can't believe they taught that. That's not the Bible." And Johnny says, "Well, Mom, if I told you what they really said, you'd never believe it." No, we're going to do the Prince of Egypt now. So now we're going to look, although more briefly, at a story, a retelling from the 1990s. And here I want to show you basically the first scene, because I want to show you how these filmmakers re-Hebraize the story in a way that DeMille did not. DeMille wanted to tell the story of Western civilization and the slave as everyman. This version wants to bring the specifically Israelite dimension of it. Not surprising, because the advisor to this film was a very well-known translator of the Hebrew scriptures into English. His name is Everett Fox. I had a nice conversation with him when this film first came out about 20 years ago. And so he acknowledged that he was the one who kept on introducing the specifically Hebraic and rabbinic elements into it. Let's go to Scene Index. Now this is a musical. The music was written by Hans Zimmer. And let's do Deliver Us, main title. It's actually very inspiring. There are family entertainment films which shouldn't be thought of as a synonym for children's entertainment. It really is for the entire family. DreamWorks, of course. We are in the great age of advertising and self-promotion. Here, the motion picture you're about to see is an adaptation of the Exodus story. Don't blame me if it's not exactly the story you read in the Bible. Artistic and historical license have been taken, but the film is true to its essence. That's truth in advertising right there. The same thing is true of the Darren Aronofsky Noah movie, if you've seen that.
What do you think of that?
I like it. I mean, there are parts I don't like, but as an enterprise in general, it has many, many intriguing points. Now, Moses is the Prince of Egypt. And so part of this story is Moses coming to become fully aware of his Hebrew identity. In the DeMille version, it's not a question. He automatically knows it. But in the later versions, the best one I didn't bring today, it's a Turner classic starring Ben Kingsley. Excellent, excellent movie about Moses. Moses stammers in that. Why does Moses stammer in Ben Kingsley's production? Because at the burning bush, Moses says, "I am not a man of words. I'm slow of speech and heavy of tongue." Charlton Heston isn't slow of speech, but Ben Kingsley is. Okay, so this is the theme song. It's taken its inspiration from DeMille in that the first scene is the scene of the oppression. See that? However, we're also going to add the deliverance of baby Moses in the midst of this scene, rather than a later scene. So the Israelites themselves are the speakers here. It's really amazing that 3,000 years ago they sang Disney-esque melodies. Okay, so now we're going to cut from the building project. You hear the music has gotten oriental? Hear that? We're in Goshen, and the soldiers are now running. Oh, listen carefully. She's singing Hebrew. Hear that? She's not singing English. She's saying, "Do not be afraid." Now she goes to English. Why did she begin with her first 4 words in Hebrew? Because this is the song of the Hebrew slaves. The voice is a voice of a very great Israeli singer. Tragically, she died young. She had an illness which was curable, and she didn't seek help for it because of shame. And it's the stilling of one of the great voices of a generation. Her name was Ofra Haza, H-A-Z-A. urge you to listen to her music. So she sings the Yocheved, not Joshabel, the way DeMille gives you, but Yocheved, which means God's glory, is the name of Moses' mother. You know the story. She takes the baby to the Nile, and she's going to sing a very beautiful song, urging him to remember his Hebrew identity. That becomes the musical leitmotif here. As Moses begins to remember his memory, this music comes back in the film. Again, if you listen to the music of a well-scored film, you will get the emotional and thematic subtext of it. You could be doing the dishes in the kitchen and just listening, and you'll know what's going on from the music. Also, I want to point out that the Israelites in 1923 were very pasty white. And by the 1990s, they're more Semitic looking, which deserves to be mentioned. And animation allows you to do all sorts of wonderful visual images. See the tear? That was Miriam following the ark on its progress. Can we get to our scene selection? I just want to show you one more scene from here where Moses, now an adolescent, becomes aware of his true identity. For my money, that's the best scene in this rendition, although the whole movie is very fine. Moses is raised as an Egyptian prince. How would he know he's an Israelite? I think it's scene 15. Let's just double check. Maybe scene index. Well, we can fast forward from scene to scene. Maybe that'll how we'll do it. I believe it's scene number 15. In the Bible, the question is never answered. In the Bible, Exodus chapter 2, there's no name mentioned. It was a man of the house of Levi, a daughter of Levi. Finally, it is it's after that. Oh, there we go, right there. Where the Egyptian eye opened up, that was it. That's it. Here, Moses is going to realize that he's an Israelite. In his dream, he is the one who is fleeing from the Egyptian soldiers and ends up drowning in the Nile. So Moses wakes up from the dream, and he goes to the hall of history, the archives of the palace, and he reads the story of his people from the hieroglyphs. So again, in the Bible, we don't know how Moses knows he's Jewish. In chapter 2, it says, the daughter of Pharaoh named him Moshe because from the water Mishitihu. It's a pun, it's a bilingual pun, because I pulled him from the water. Moshe in Egyptian means son of. Ra Moshe, Ramesses, son of Ra. Tut Moses, right? King Tut, right? Son of Tut. Moshe means son of. So she's claiming him, she's adopting him. But here, Moses is reading the hieroglyphs. He sees what's actually happened. He's crushed. And look who comes. His father. The Hebrews grew too numerous, finally working back what is missing in the DeMille. See that? Exodus chapter 1, they grew too numerous. We had to do something about it. Recognize the voice? Make it so, number 1. This is Patrick Stewart. And the voice of Moses, do you recognize that? Or you haven't heard it yet? They were only slaves. And that horrifies him. So he runs away. Okay, let's put the last one on now. What both of these films have remained traditional about is the notion that God tells Moses what he needs to know and Moses follows it. In the last film, the ambiguity, the partiality of God's message is emphasized way beyond the biblical original. Moses says to God, "What's your name?" God says, "I am that I am." What kind of answer is that? Can you imagine being stopped by a police officer who says, "I'd like to see your identification," and you say to him, "I am that I am"? Pretty soon that question is going to go downtown, right? So in this last film, Moses is struggling to find out what God wants of him. And let's see if we can just show one of those. Let's go beyond this. I'll just find one representative scene. Hold on. Let's see. Maybe the next step. Let's see if that'll give it to us. No, just before that, the next step. Right after that. There, 17. Let's see if that gives it to us. This is the next step after they've successfully crossed the sea. What are they supposed to do next?
So what now?
I don't know. What now?
Where did it go?
I don't know. That's Moses.
Well, we need water. We'll find a spring somewhere.
We'll find a spring
But after
somewhere.
that,
And after that,
we'll find another, and then
We'll
we'll wait to feed them once the bread runs out.
What happens to us now? Now we are free.
We stay together, and then we wait for God to tell us when to go to the land He's promised us.
Moses really doesn't know how to get from here to there. And he's rather upset about that.
What do you do?
Here we go.
I don't know where to go next.
I don't know where they should go next. Can't you tell me?
Have it your way, make me work it out for myself.
Have it your way. Make me work it out for myself. That's the essence of this film. We're going to have to work it out for ourselves. Even the 10 Commandments in this film are not simply God's gift preformed. Moses sees what people are doing wrong. He sees them murdering. He sees them stealing. He sees them committing adultery. He sees them lying to cover the other sins. He sees them coveting. And that's why the 10 Commandments are what they are. The achievement of this film is to make the 10 Commandments not Deus ex machina, but an organic response to the history of the newly freed slaves. In a sense, this is the least traditional because it's taking what the Bible portrays as God's preformed gift and it turns it into an evolutionary cooperation between God and the Israelites. But who's to know if that isn't the most faithful response of all? Right? To say that our Bible is a product of our encounter with God. It's not traditional, but it's very religious. So I see our time is up now. I hope that I've inspired you to want to study these films very closely and don't get all discommoded when they depart from the Bible, but ask yourself the question, why are they doing that? What are they adding? What are they trying to say to me? Thank you so much.